Dean Martin had everything a man could dream of: fame, fortune, and the admiration of millions. To the world, he was the king of cool, the smooth voice behind timeless songs and the effortless charm of Hollywood's golden age. But behind that relaxed smile and the glass of whiskey he always held on stage, there was a life crumbling in silence. The truth was, Dean Martin spent his final years as a shadow of himself, broken by grief, haunted by memories, and quietly watched over by the woman who once loved him more than anyone else. Jean Martin had been his wife for 24 years, and even after their divorce, she never stopped caring. While the world saw Dean as untouchable, Jean saw what fame had taken from him: the loneliness, the regret, and the devastating loss that no one could save him from. Their story began with glamour and ended in unbearable sorrow, a story of love, loyalty, and death that even Hollywood couldn't script. This is the tragic final chapter of Dean Martin and the woman who watched him die slowly, from Steubenville to stardom. Dean Martin's story didn't begin in a mansion or a movie set. It began in the rough gray streets of Steubenville, Ohio, a steel town on the banks of the Ohio River. He was born Dino Paul Crocetti on June 7, 1917, the son of two Italian immigrants chasing their own version of the American dream. His father, Gaetano Crocetti, had arrived from Abruzzo, Italy in 1913 and set up a small barber shop, while his mother, Angela, was a first-generation Italian-American with a love for singing. Their home was always filled with laughter, food, and Italian folk songs, but money was scarce, and English was rarely spoken. When Dino finally started school, he didn't understand a word his teachers said. His thick accent made him a target for bullies. They teased him relentlessly, calling him names, mimicking his broken English. He later joked about being too smart for school, but the truth was, it was loneliness that pushed him out. By the 10th grade, he had dropped out entirely, convinced that the real lessons in life would be learned outside the classroom. Those lessons came hard and fast. He worked any job he could find, as a steel mill laborer, a gas station attendant, a milkman, even a bootleg liquor runner during Prohibition. He also boxed under the name Kid Crochet, a scrappy welterweight who fought 12 matches and won only one. "I won all but 11, he liked to laugh later, masking the pain behind humor. The fights left him with a crooked nose, split lip, and scarred hands. Years later, after Dean became famous, comedian Lou Costello paid to have his nose fixed, a small act that helped shape his suave image. In those years, Dino shared a tiny New York apartment with his friend and fellow entertainer, Sonny King. They were broke, but resourceful. When money ran out, they staged bare-knuckle fights in their living room, charging $5 a ticket. On a good night, they'd earn $50, barely enough to cover rent. On bad nights, they'd pretend to get phone calls in diners just to steal bites off abandoned plates. It was during these lean years that Dean's charm began to surface. Working as a croupier in an illegal casino behind a tobacco shop, he would sing softly between games to entertain gamblers. One night, a band leader named Ernie McKay overheard him and offered him a singing job. Dean said yes, and his entire world shifted. Now performing under the name Dino Martini, inspired by Italian tenor Nino Martini, he began touring Ohio and Pennsylvania. By 1940, he joined bandleader Sammy Watkins, who gave him one timeless piece of advice: "You've got the voice, kid. But if you want to go places, drop the I, make it Dean Martin." It was a small change that transformed everything. The name sounded smooth, American, and unforgettable. And from that moment, the legend of Dean Martin began to take shape. But he had no idea how much pain and glory that name would carry in the years to come: love, marriage, and betrayal. By the early 1940s, Dean Martin's life was finally starting to move upward. He had the voice, the charm, and the ambition. But what he didn't yet have was stability. That came in 1941, when he met Elizabeth Ann Betty McDonald, a young, warm-hearted woman from Ohio who fell in love with him before the fame, before the spotlight. They married that same year, long before Dean Martin became a household name. Together, they struggled through the early years of his career, nights filled with small club performances, unpaid gigs, and the uncertainty of whether his dream would ever lead anywhere. Betty became his anchor. While Dean sang in smoky lounges and dance halls, she stayed home raising their growing family. They welcomed 4 children, Craig in 1941, Claudia in 1944, Gail in 1945, and Dina in 1948. On stage, Dean's easy smile and soft voice made audiences fall in love with him. But off stage, he was just a young father trying to make ends meet. He was charming, but restless. Fame was beginning to call, and with it came temptations that no marriage could easily withstand. As his career rose, the marriage began to crumble. Betty struggled with severe alcoholism, often disappearing for days or weeks at a time. Dean, meanwhile, was surrounded by beautiful women, flashing lights, and endless parties. He didn't resist. The affairs were whispered about in Hollywood circles, but rarely printed. Dean's public image, the smooth gentleman who always had a drink and a joke, kept the gossip at bay. But at home, the damage was done. By 1949, the marriage had collapsed. Dean filed for divorce and was awarded custody of all 4 children, an unusual decision for that era. Betty quietly moved to San Francisco, staying far away from the fame that would soon consume her former husband. She lived out the rest of her life in near anonymity, dying in 1989, decades after Dean had moved on, though never completely escaping the shadow of his name. Just 1 week after the divorce papers were finalized, Dean married again, this time to Jean Bieger, a model and former Orange Bowl queen. Their wedding on September 1st, 1949, was a Hollywood spectacle, with his partner Jerry Lewis serving as best man. Jean was the picture of grace and loyalty, and for a while, it seemed like Dean had finally found balance. She was there through his biggest successes, his comedy films with Jerry, his rise as a solo artist, his induction into the Rat Pack. Together they had 3 children, Dean Paul in 1951, Richie in 1953, and Gina in 1956. Jean raised all 7 of Dean's children, both hers and Betty's, under one roof. To the public, they were the perfect American family, glamorous, united, and happy. But fame is never a stable foundation. As Dean's career exploded, his absences grew longer, his nights wilder, and his infidelities more painful. Jane forgave him more times than she could count, but by the late 1960s, even her patience ran out. In 1973, after 24 years together, they divorced. Dean would remarry once more, but everyone close to him knew Jean had been the love of his life, and he would never truly recover from losing her. The Rat Pack years and the price of fame. When Dean Martin walked away from his decade-long partnership with Jerry Lewis in 1956, many thought he had signed his own career death warrant. Critics called him the straight man who couldn't survive without Lewis. But Dean proved them wrong. Within 2 years, he reinvented himself, not as a sidekick, but as one of the coolest, most magnetic entertainers in America. His rebirth began in Las Vegas, where he joined forces with Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. Together, they became known as the Rat Pack, a group of smooth-talking, hard-living performers who turned the Strip into their playground. Night after night, they sold out shows at the Sands Hotel, dazzling audiences with their chemistry, their banter, and their effortless charm. To fans, they were the definition of class and swagger. On stage, Dean looked like the wildest of them all, a cigarette in one hand, a whiskey glass in the other, his tie always a little loose, his grin a little crooked. But that persona was mostly an illusion. His drink was often apple juice, not liquor. The slurred words and lazy jokes were part of an act so convincing that even Sinatra once admitted, "Dean fooled everyone. He was the only one sober." But while the act made him a star, it also created a wall between the man and the myth. People stopped seeing Dean as a real person. He was the king of cool, a symbol of smooth confidence, even when he felt anything but. Behind the curtain, Dean was quiet, withdrawn, and at times painfully lonely. He rarely went to after-parties or stayed up gambling like Sinatra did. Most nights when the show ended, he went home, watched TV, and fell asleep alone. Still, his charisma was undeniable. His performances in films like Rio Bravo and The Young Lions silenced every critic who had ever doubted him. He showed depth, vulnerability, and range that no one expected. Hollywood had tried to put him in a box, the comic singer, the lounge act, but Dean broke it open. Then came The Dean Martin Show in 1965. NBC wanted to capture his charm on television, but Dean made demands no other star would dare make. No rehearsals, one filming day a week, and full ownership of the show after its first broadcast. To everyone's shock, NBC agreed. The result was a massive hit, 264 episodes, over 40 million weekly viewers, and a television empire built entirely on Dean's charm. Every week he walked onto that stage looking as if he hadn't prepared a thing, and that was the secret. It was him. Unscripted, unbothered, untouchable. Yet the more famous he became, the emptier he felt. The laughter, the applause, the glamorous friends, it was all real, but fleeting. Dean once said, "If you have luck, you don't have to be smart." But luck fades, and by the end of the 1970s, Dean's world and his heart began to dim. The day everything fell apart. On March 21, 1987, Dean Martin's world ended. His son, Dean Paul Martin, a handsome actor, musician, and Air National Guard pilot, died when his F-4C Phantom jet crashed into a California mountain during a snowstorm. He was only 35. Dean Paul had been his father's pride and joy, the golden boy, as Dean called him. They had shared an unspoken bond. Dean had lived through divorce, fame, and scandal, but nothing could prepare him for losing his son. The search for the wreckage lasted 6 days. When it was over, Dean withdrew completely. Those who knew him said he was never the same. He stopped smiling, stopped performing, and stopped caring. His longtime friend Rich Little said, once he lost his son, that was the end of him. At the time of the crash, Dean was preparing for a tour with Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. called The Ultimate Event. It was meant to be a triumphant reunion of the Rat Pack, but after Dean Paul's death, he simply couldn't go on. He showed up for the first few performances, distant, quiet, and broken, then quit mid-tour. Sinatra tried to push him back, but Dean refused. Jeanne, his ex-wife, rushed to his side. Though divorced for over a decade, she was the only one who could reach him. She stayed near, checking on him constantly, dining in the same restaurant where he ate alone night after night. She didn't intrude, she simply watched over him, quietly, faithfully, as he faded. That tragic year marked the end of Dean Martin's spirit. The world saw the charming star who once sang "Everybody Loves Somebody," but those close to him saw a man consumed by grief. His famous line, "I'm just waiting to die," wasn't a joke. It was a confession, the slow fade and the final goodbye. After 1987, Dean Martin slowly disappeared from the public eye. He rarely performed, rarely socialized, and spent most evenings sitting alone in Beverly Hills restaurants, the same place where Jean, too, would quietly sit nearby. It was as if she couldn't stop watching over him, even when words were no longer needed. By 1993, his health began to fail. Decades of smoking caught up with him. Doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer and urged him to undergo surgery. He refused. "No," he told friends. "I've had a good life." That simple sentence carried all the exhaustion of a man who had lived through too much loss. He spent his final months in near silence, surrounded by old photographs, TV reruns, and fading memories of his son. The man who once filled nightclubs with laughter now lived in near darkness, waiting for the end. On Christmas Day, December 25th, 1995, Dean Martin died at age 78 from acute respiratory failure caused by emphysema. His passing stunned Hollywood. Frank Sinatra, heartbroken, called him a brother, not by blood, but by choice. 3 days later, Las Vegas paid tribute. For 10 minutes, the lights on the Strip dimmed, a rare gesture reserved for legends. The Sands, Flamingo, and Stardust went dark in silence. The city he helped define stood still for the man who made it shine. Dean was buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. His crypt bears a simple inscription, a line from his most famous song, "Everybody loves somebody sometime." Jan never remarried. For years after his death, she lived quietly, surrounded by photos of her children and Dean. When she died of cancer in 2016 at age 89, she was laid to rest not far from him. Their son, Richie, who had devoted his life to keeping his father's music alive, died just weeks before her. The Martin family had given the world beauty, laughter, and unforgettable music, but behind that brilliance lay a lifetime of heartbreak. Dean Martin spent his final years surrounded not by fame or applause, but by silence, and by the quiet loyalty of a woman who could never stop loving him. Jean watched him fade, powerless to stop the slow decline that began the day they lost their son. In the end, she followed him, closing a love story that began in light and ended in shadow. Their names may be written in gold across Hollywood history, but their story remains one of pain, loyalty, and loss, the kind that fame can't disguise. Do you think Dean Martin ever found peace before he died? Or did he spend his last days haunted by what he lost? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age.